14.2, the second section of chapter 14. This section is, so the last section, 14.1, was on anatomy. This one is looking at the sexually transmitted infections of the reproductive system. So some of these you probably have heard of, or maybe all of them, but we're just going to go through these really quickly. Shouldn't take too long. And this is important, I guess, to know about the reproductive system, in the sense that these things a lot of these sexually transmitted infections can cause you to be infertile or affect your reproductive possibilities. So we'll go into each of those as we read through this. So it says sexual intercourse involves close physical contact and the exchange of bodily fluids. Sexual intercourse can transmit infection from one person to another. An infection that is transmitted only or mainly by sexual contact is generally known as sexually transmitted infections. STIs may be caused by viruses, bacteria, and parasites. The STIs that are the greatest concern are those caused by viruses and bacteria. Most common viral STIs are HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, genital herpes, and the human papillomavirus, or HPV. The most common bacterial STIs are chlamydia, gonorrhea, and syphilis. All right, so the first one, if we look back at this is talking about the different viral infections. So we start with our viral infection of HIV/AIDS. So AIDS is short for the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. AIDS is caused by a group of related viruses that are collectively called the human immunodeficiency virus. So AIDS is basically caused by HIV. HIV attacks a particular form of white blood cell called the helper T cells. So if you can remember back to Bio 20, when we talked about the immune system, the helper T cells, that is the part of the immune response that is affected. As the level of the helper T cells in the blood decreases, the infected person becomes more vulnerable to infections that may lead to sickness and death in people who are diagnosed with acute AIDS. HIV is transmitted through sexual contact with an infected person, intravenous drug users who share needles. So this is the only way that you'd be able to contract HIV. So just by giving someone a hug or something like that, you're not going to get HIV. You need to sort of mix those bodily fluids. Children of mothers who are infected with HIV may themselves be infected before or during birth or through breastfeeding. So many children who are born to mothers that have HIV end up contracting it as well. There's no cure for HIV, and treatments can alleviate the symptoms of specific diseases and can extend the life expectancy of someone with AIDS. So if you have AIDS, there's no guarantee that you'll be okay, but there is definitely treatments that can help to extend your life. Many of treatments have harmful side effects. While the search continues for effective treatments and for a vaccine that can help to protect against AIDS, the most effective solution is to prevent transmission. So the most effective way of not getting HIV is obviously protecting yourself. So using protection or not sharing needles, stuff like that. So if we think about HIV in drug users, that's one of the main reasons that people have, or they do have, safe injection sites where drug users can get new needles. They go and they get their drug there with proper needle sanitation. So yeah, they're still getting the drug, but they aren't sharing needles, which can cause the spread of disease. Not just HIV, but hepatitis and some other things. Okay, which brings us to hepatitis. So the next one, hepatitis. There are 3 types of viral infections called hepatitis, so A, B, and C. Hepatitis A is usually contracted by drinking water that's contaminated with fecal matter. It is also transmitted through oral or anal contact. So this can be sexually transmitted, but it's mostly transmitted through drinking water. So this is one that if you're going to another country, foreign country that doesn't have the same sanitary, practices as we do in Canada, you might want to protect yourself against this. And you can do so by getting a vaccine. Hepatitis B is spread in the same way as HIV, so through sexual contact or through other things that are other things that are in contact with infected bodily fluids or blood. And this is why it's considered an STI. So hepatitis B, you can get that through sexual intercourse, but also through any sort of mixture of bodily fluids and blood. So that could be one that you could get through sharing needles, because that blood-to-blood contact. And then hepatitis C is transmitted through blood-to-blood contact as well, through infected needles or syringes. Hepatitis viruses can cross the placenta to infect an unborn child. There are effective and safe vaccines for hepatitis A and B, and hepatitis B vaccine is routinely given to babies in Canada. So you guys might not know, but you likely do have the vaccine for hepatitis B. I think that they normally give people hepatitis A and B in school. But I don't know if you've seen the commercials. There's the Twinrix commercials, and they're just like a vaccine that gives you the immunity to hepatitis A and B. So that's one that you should take before you're going to maybe a foreign country, just to protect yourself from the drinking water and food and such like that. Genital herpes is an extremely common viral STI. Genital herpes is a viral STI that is caused by 1 or 2 of the herpes viruses. So there's 2 types of herpes viruses, simplex 1 and simplex 2. Simplex 2 is more likely to be acquired through genital contact, so that's sort of the sexually transmitted one, where simplex 1 or HSV1 is commonly caused by infections of the mouth, so cold sores. So if you have cold sores or you get them, I do, unfortunately. I didn't get them until I was in my 20s, and I get them around my nose. Most people get them around their mouth. I'm just a weirdo, but that means that I carry the genital herpes, or not genital herpes. Whoa, I'm going way out there. Herpes simplex virus. So the herpes simplex 1 is the one that would have to do with cold sores, and I get those cold sores normally when my immune system is down. So if I'm feeling sick, I've got a cold, that's when a cold sore is going to show up. And maybe you guys have cold sores too. But make sure we know that this is a different strain of the virus. So this is not genital herpes, which is simplex 2. It's simplex 1, which is the cold sore version. There's an increased risk of HIV infection if you have genital herpes. There's also a risk of transmission from infected mother to her baby at birth. The resulting infection in a baby may cause blindness, neurological disorders, and even death. Physicians usually recommend cesarean births for those infected mothers to protect their babies. So, in the places where you would be infected by herpes, if we go back, maybe I will go back, might be a far distance, but if we look back at the female anatomy, all of the genital herpes, the sores would be in this area, sometimes even into the vagina. So if we're talking about that, when the baby's coming out of here, they're going to pass over those sores, which are going to, I guess, pass that herpes to the baby. And so if we have a C-section, you can just avoid that completely, and the baby should be fine. And there's no cure for herpes. Sort of something, yeah, you can never lose. So for my entire life, I'll always have cold sores. If I analyze my cold sores because I'm a crazy nerd, but it's really important that when you do have cold sores, that you try and contain them, because my cold sores will always show up in the same spot. But if they're all open sores, they can be really contagious. And if I'm like wiping my nose, because I get them around my nose, and I wipe another area of my face, then I've spread the virus possibly, and then the next time I get cold sores, they could show up. Oops, my phone starts playing music. Yeah, so it's really important that you contain it in that area, and the same thing would go for genital herpes, but very much harder, I guess, to contain. And then the last one here from viruses is the HPV, or human papillomavirus. This is responsible for the condition known as genital warts, and it's transmitted by skin-to-skin contact. The symptoms are not always obvious, and HPV can cause more serious disorders in women. It's linked to cervical cancer, and there's an increased risk of tumors of the vulva, vagina, anus, and penis. So HPV in males tends to show up. Not always, but more so than it does in females. So females can be carriers of HPV and not even know it, and then pass it on to their partner. So that's why it's really important that you get yourself tested, both yourself and your partner to get tested, to make sure that you don't carry these disorders, these STIs that you don't know you have. But also, it's really important as a woman to make sure that you're checking this so that it doesn't become cervical cancer. And if you leave HPV sort of untreated, that can definitely lead to cervical cancer. So how we would protect ourselves against that would be to get a pap smear. And that's, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but basically the doctor will take a swab and swab inside of your cervix, so just on the edge of your uterus, and they'll take a section and then they basically test it. And they can test to see if there's certain viruses, certain STIs, that sort of stuff. So I think that, I'm not sure how old you're supposed to be before you get one, but basically if you are sexually active, you should get one of those every year, I think, but now 3 years. I'm not sure what age you are when you don't have to get it every year, but I used to get it every year, and now I get one every 3 years. Not a fun thing to get done, but really important to protect yourself. So chlamydia, we're moving on to the bacterial infections. This is potentially a dangerous infection caused by bacteria. It is dangerous since up to 75% of infected people have no symptoms. So you might have no idea you have chlamydia, but you're passing it on. The rate of infection in young women is more than twice the rate of young men. In women, if left untreated, it can spread and can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, which can cause infertility. So basically, pelvic inflammatory disease blocks the oviduct with scar tissue, and this can give you an increased chance of getting HIV. If we look back to this, so what's happening with the pelvic inflammatory disease is you're leaving chlamydia untreated, and it can start to spread up into your oviducts, causing scar tissue. So when the egg is released, it can't make it any farther. So it's not a good thing, because remember, the egg and sperm need to meet in here to be fertilized, to go into the uterus. So if there's something stopping it from getting there, well, you're SOL. You're not going to be able to have a baby. I mean, in the normal sense. But I think we get to that later on how there's some technologies that they can use to help people. A baby who comes in contact with chlamydia during birth can develop infections of the eyes and respiratory tract. There is effective tests, and if diagnosed early enough, can be treated with antibiotics and lead to a complete cure. So chlamydia, there's definitely a cure for it. You can use antibiotics. So really, bacterial infections, normally antibiotics can help you to get rid of it. Gonorrhea, which is the second most widespread STI in Canada. It's often found with chlamydia, however, the rate of infection is almost twice as high in men as in women. If left untreated, the disease can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease as well, and may spread through the bloodstream to the joints, heart, and brain. A baby who comes in contact with gonorrhea in the birth canal can develop a serious eye infection. Physicians routinely give eye drops to newborns to prevent this. And gonorrhea can be successfully treated with antibiotics as well. Syphilis is one of the most least common of the 3 bacterial STIs. There are 3 stages to the syphilis infection. Each stage is separated by a period of latency. So latency means it's sort of like nothing's happening. Any contact with the infected person may spread the infection in the 2nd stage. During the 3rd stage, the infection begins to affect the cardiovascular and nervous system. An infected person may become mentally ill, blind, or lame, and may develop heart disease. During any stage, syphilitic bacteria can infect a developing embryo, causing birth defects or being stillborn. If the disease is not treated early, the bacteria can cause permanent damage, and it can be treated effectively with antibiotics. So you can definitely treat this with antibiotics, and nowadays most people that ever do contact syphilis can get that cleared up pretty fast. Back in the day, syphilis was actually led to people going crazy, so they say. So there's people, these normal people that didn't seem to have any sign of mental illness would all of a sudden become very weird, doing these crazy things, and then eventually possibly die. And this was all related to syphilis. So they didn't know that they had syphilis, but that was actually what was causing these people to sort of go crazy, quote unquote. So how can we control the spread of STIs in Canada? Well, many cases of STIs go undiagnosed simply because people are not aware of the significance of their symptoms. So people are having symptoms, they don't know that they're because of an STI. When people know the symptoms of STIs, they are more likely to be tested and treated before they infect others. Health practitioners, stress education and awareness programs are an essential part of controlling the spread of STIs without knowing it, and the importance of personal responsibility for safe sex practices. Excuse me. So, basically what we're trying to say here is that it's up to you to practice safe sex or to get yourself regularly tested, but the most important thing is to practice safe sex. STIs can lead to various serious diseases, but they are preventable with protection. So that's that whole section. That's just the basis, just knowing what those different diseases are. And yeah, that's just about it. Thanks for seeing this video, and we'll move on to chapter 14.3 tomorrow.